Coming up on today's vlog, Newcastle United in a bit of an injury crisis going into this game against Burnley. Could even have to call on an emergency striker, so stay tuned. We're going to go through what we'll say at the press conference very soon. So Eddie Howe is facing up to a little bit of an injury crisis at Newcastle going into that game against Burnley. He's got 4 players who could be doubtful for this game, starting with Callum Wilson, who's got a minor hamstring injury, which Eddie Howe will be taking a look at today to see if he can indeed face the claret at St James's Park. Alexander Isak is another one who has a little bit of a knock, and defensively Dan Burn and Sven Botman are doubts because Sven Botman's got a knock and Dan Burn has suffered from some illness. So for Eddie Howe, he'll go into this game knowing he may have to make changes that have been forced upon him. You look at the schedule, it's punishing. Newcastle are feeling the strain of that. I think ultimately for the players, they want to play games. They're in a great run of form. They just have to make sure that they treat Burnley with the same respect as he did Man City the other night and PSG moving forward. I think for Eddie Howe, that's something that he'll get through to his players. But ultimately, if Newcastle can beat Burnley, they could be pretty much back in the European spots come the weekend. So a lot to play for, but it's a game Newcastle must focus on before getting ready for the Champions League against PSG. So those main talking points from Eddie Howe's press conference this morning, which we've already touched on actually, the 4 injury doubts going into the game. And I suppose this was always going to happen for Newcastle at some stage. Injuries mounting up. They've already dealt with problems for Joe Willock, who we still haven't seen this season, and Joe Linton has just got back. And then obviously you've got Harvey Barnes, who went off with that toe injury the other day. He's now going to be missing for 3 months. So on top of that, Eddie Howe talking about defensive issues today. Sven Botman has picked up a knock of some sort, and basically he's touch and go for this game against Burnley at the weekend, and Dan Burn with illness too. So defensively, a couple of question marks there, which we'll see if they get through training today. And Callum Wilson and Alexander Isak also facing late fitness tests. So Eddie Howe touching on it in his press conference. This is the impact of those 3 game weeks which we spoke about earlier in the season. But look, I think the good thing for Newcastle is it's been a 3 game week, but all the results have been positive, and they can pick up another positive result against Burnley at the weekend. So Eddie today talking about how he expects, the rigours of this fixture list. It's demanding, it's punishing. He believes that, they're going to have more issues with that moving forward. It's how they deal with that. They're already having to deal with issues, with the limited time between games. Newcastle coming back late from Milan the other night and having to prepare for Sheffield United. Maybe only got 1 good quality session in that time, then having to prepare for Man City. And it's been a similar story in the last few days. Even after the game, they were training on the pitch after the Man City win. Immediately, the clutch of players were on there training with Graham Jones. So Newcastle having to really be clever with how they approach this Burnley tough game, just on the basis that Burnley haven't won yet, and they're going to win at some point. So Newcastle will know they're going to be right going into this one. And really, if they don't get the application right with PSG around the corner, and not making sure that they don't focus too much on PSG and talking about Mbappe's fitness, which Eddie was asked about today, then they know they could be in trouble if they take their eye off the ball against Burnley. So it's important to get this one done, get it ticked off. Doesn't matter how it's done. I don't think fans will complain if Newcastle scraped a 1-0 win here. I don't think they'll be bothered as long as they can just keep it going into that game against PSG. And then things are really kind of building up to another big week, PSG and West Ham away at the end of it. So tough, a tough schedule, but look, I think there's always been the argument that players sometimes would prefer to play games than be trained all the time. So there is that argument as well. I think really this season is very different to last season. Again, something Eddie was happy to discuss with us in the press conference just before. Said, last week we had, a full week to prepare for matches on the training field, and, could really put in that intense workload, which we then seen on the pitch at the end of the week. They're not going to be able to do that this year. The way Eddie Howe's team train, they pretty much train like they play. It's very intense from what I've witnessed. I've been privileged enough to watch a few training sessions and since Eddie's been in charge, and it is very intense. As I say, he'll feel that he can't do that this season, otherwise they're just going to suffer from burnout at the end of the day. So look, it's a different season, a different challenge, but look what Newcastle so far are coping with. Speaking to some of the players after the Sheffield United win, Sean Long and staff was saying that, after those 3 defeats at the start of the season, everyone was thinking it was the end of the world, and Newcastle suddenly have put together this amazing run, 3 wins, a draw, clean sheets, a Champions League point on the board, progress in the Carabao Cup. Suddenly things are looking a lot better now, and really going into the weekend, I think confidence carries them through. There's a bit of adrenaline, of course, but confidence is a massive thing, and this, for me, this Burnley game is going to be key because it puts them back in touch with the European places if they can win. And I think the bread and butter for Newcastle is the Premier League. As much as we enjoy the Champions League and progress in the Cups, making sure that they have another strong season, top 4, top 5, trying to get back in the Champions League. That is the main thing for Newcastle this season. Look, would love them to win a trophy. Hopefully they can. Hopefully they have another run in the Carabao Cup. They can challenge, and hopefully they can make a good fist of the Champions League. But ultimately, at the end of the season, if Newcastle are slumped in the bottom half or slumped in mid-table, then it hasn't been a good follow-on from last season. So they need to stay in and around at the top of the Premier League. Already we've had a few surprises this season. Chelsea have had that bad start. I thought they'd do a lot better. So there's opportunities to really kick on at the business end of the table. Let's hope they can do it. They'll need this win against Burnley in order to do so. If Wilson and Isaac are going to be missing, that was another question in there. Then Eddie saying he has got options. He says Anthony Gordon can push up into that position as well. You've got people like Miguel Almiron, Jacob Murphy. There's plenty of options for Newcastle in the final third. Should those 2 players not be involved, okay, there's not what you would call an out-and-out centre forward, but look, both of those players would be a big miss to the team. But it wouldn't be the biggest nightmare because there is quality around that pitch to come in and replace. So we'll see what happens on that score. It was another interesting press conference for Newcastle. Another press conference, basically. Eddie Howe has faced the press about 3 or 4 times in the last few days now. He was in good spirits. That's a positive at this stage. Normally, having to face so many press conferences in a row is difficult for a manager. But look, he was fine with it. He answered every question that was thrown at him. Newcastle are in a good place at the minute. Let's hope they can keep that going against Burnley when Vincent Kompany brings his newly promoted team to St James's Park. That in itself will be a big buzz for their players. I'm pretty sure, but they haven't had the greatest of start. And I think if Newcastle can, get one of those early goals, then I think it would be a huge plus for Newcastle going into what many will deem a winnable fixture.